Hello and welcome. Today we delve into one of the most daring and pivotal battles of the Second World War, the Battle of the Bulge, fought in the frozen woods of December 1944. A sudden German assault aimed to shatter Allied lines, seize crucial ports, and force a peace on their terms. But beneath the deceptive calm of snow-covered forests, shocking secrets lurked just waiting to emerge. Did the Germans truly believe their heavily armored tanks, like the colossal King Tiger with armor up to 150 millimeters thick, could break through American defenses? Were the elite 5th and 6th Panzer armies confident that surprise, winter weather, and blitzkrieg tactics would guarantee victory? Could the Americans' unexpected use of their 90 millimeter guns, originally designed for anti-aircraft purposes, turn the tide against these formidable armored assaults? And what role did the fog and heavy clouds play in hiding the true strength of the American defenses? Finally, how did a weapon crafted to shoot down bombers become a critical ground defense weapon, reshaping our understanding of battlefield innovation? All these pieces point to a single question. What was the real story behind the Battle of the Bulge? And how did ingenuity and resilience challenge the might of the Wehrmacht's most daring offensive? In this video, we will trace the path from initial German breakthroughs to unexpected American countermeasures, separating fact from myth and revealing the shocking truths that changed the course of history. The battle is about to begin. Are you ready to uncover the secrets hidden in the snow? In the cold and still depths of December of the year 1944, a blanket of pristine white snow cloaked the Arden Forest, giving the landscape an air of deceptive tranquility. Beneath that seemingly peaceful surface, however, a storm was quietly brewing, as Germany was quietly and desperately preparing one of its final, most audacious attempts to turn the tide of the Second World War. Adolf Hitler, knowing that time was rapidly running out, initiated what was later called the Ardennes Offensive, better known in history as the Battle of the Bulge. His strategic aim was to split the Allied forces' lines, seize the vital port city of Antwerp, and impose his terms for peace through overwhelming force. At that moment, the American soldiers occupying this region were weary, worn from months of relentless combat, and stationed in a sector that was widely regarded as relatively quiet and low in threat level. Few of these troops anticipated that within only a few days, they would be facing some of the most formidable armored units that the German Wehrmacht had ever assembled in a single coordinated attack. The plans devised by Germany were both ambitious and bordering on recklessness. They involved deploying a formidable force of over 200,000 troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, all moving swiftly through the dense, snow-covered woods and rugged terrain of the Ardennes. Among the German units involved in this bold assault were some of their most elite formations, including the feared 5th Panzer Army and the 6th Panzer Army, both under the command of the Schutzstaffel, or SS. Their mission was to punch holes through the thinly held and stretched American frontline defenses. The armored spearhead was supported by mighty tanks such as the Panther and the colossal Tiger II, sometimes called the King Tiger, a beast of war with frontal armor up to 150 millimeters thick, far exceeding the penetration capabilities of most of the Allied anti-tank weapons of the time. The Germans believed that their heavily armored assault, combined with the element of surprise and the harsh winter weather, would ensure rapid breakthroughs, collapsing the American defenses and potentially forcing a negotiated peace on their terms. Meanwhile, the American defenders, having been stretched increasingly thin and fatigued from continuous fighting, were facing an uphill battle. Many of the units lining the Ardennes front were composed of inexperienced soldiers, still recovering from earlier battles, or units demoralized by the relentless pressure of ongoing combat. Supplies were dwindling, and morale was uncertain among the troops, while the treacherous terrain, thick forests, and snow-covered roads made rapid reinforcement and resupply difficult. Despite these challenges, the American soldiers possessed some unexpected advantages rooted in their arsenal. Among the weapons they possessed, originally designed for anti-aircraft purposes, was the formidable 90 millimeter M1 gun. These weapons had been developed with the specific goal of targeting high-flying Luftwaffe bombers, boasting long barrels, high muzzle velocities, and advanced fire control systems that made them some of the finest anti-aircraft guns in the Allied fleet. Few German tank crews could have anticipated that, amidst the chaos of battle, their enemy's defenses would include these guns firing horizontally across snow-choked roads, turning the tables on the attackers. As the offensive officially erupted on December 16th, the weather conditions played favorably into the Germans' plans. Heavy clouds cloaked the sky, grounding Allied aircraft and preventing reconnaissance flights and air support, which normally would have devastated rapid German advances. In the dense woodland, columns of German armor rumbled forward, the engines echoing ominously through the silent, snow-laden trees. The American infantry, caught off guard and under-equipped, were forced into hasty retreats, and the American defensive line bent dangerously, threatening to break apart. Yet even in the midst of chaos and apparent despair, some American officers recognized that desperation often called for innovative solutions. They began to reorient and reposition their available weapons, particularly the 90-millimeter guns, from their traditional static anti-aircraft positions into concealed, camouflaged ambush sites, strategically placed along the most likely avenues of tank attack. This improvisation, born out of necessity and ingenuity, would soon prove pivotal, altering the course of the entire battle. The Ardennes battlefield thus became a brutal forge, where established military doctrine, engineering ingenuity, and raw, resolute courage clashed in fierce combat. The Germans, believing in the superiority of their tanks and confident in the paralysis of their enemy's defenses, soon discovered that American artillery crews, quick to adapt and innovate, could challenge their assumptions. Snow continued to fall heavily, muffling sound and movement, as the war's unpredictable dance unfolded in those snow-covered woods. In the midst of a tense, hushed atmosphere, where the muffled sound of movement and the heavy breathing of young soldiers resonated in the cold air, soldiers hurriedly adjusted their equipment, their hands slipping inside frozen gloves as they aimed their sights skyward, calibrating their weapons towards the vast open sky. These young gunners, driven by a mixture of adrenaline and determination, were prepared to face the unknown, their focus fixed on the distant, cold horizon where enemy aircraft might appear at any moment. However, as the conflict evolved, their sights shifted from the limitless sky to the dense, dark silhouette of nearby trees, where suddenly the threat of German armor materialized, disrupting the preset plans and transforming the battlefield into an entirely different arena of combat. This unexpected confrontation, where anti-aircraft artillery was now being called upon to face heavily armored ground vehicles, set the stage for a clash that neither side had fully envisioned. On one side, the Germans, with their formidable tanks and well-coordinated strikes, strove to maintain their strategic edge. On the other, the Americans relied on a combination of resilience, quick thinking, and the peculiar adaptability of their weaponry, turning what was originally meant for aerial defense into a defensive weapon against ground threats. Central to this evolving battlefield scenario was the 55 caliber 90-millimeter gun, an artillery piece that was about to carve out a noteworthy place in military history, transforming the battlefield and the perceptions of ground combat weaponry. The 90-millimeter M1 gun was initially designed during the late 1930s primarily as an anti-aircraft device. Its engineers envisioned a sophisticated weapon capable of intercepting high-flying enemy bombers, which had become a significant threat by then. They aimed for it to be effective against aircraft such as the hulking, fast-moving Heinkel, He-111, or the agile, deadly Junkers Ju-88, a clear indication that its primary role was air defense rather than direct engagement on the ground. The focus was on lofty altitudes, rapid fire, and the ability to intercept enemy aircraft at considerable ranges, not on crushing tanks or fortifications. By the year 1941, however, the gun had proven to be much more than just an effective air defense system. It boasted a muzzle velocity that exceeded 800 meters per second, an incredibly high speed for its caliber, and it could fire shells weighing about 15 kilograms to altitudes surpassing 30,000 feet. Such performance metrics made it a formidable component of the United States air defenses, and its crews quickly became proficient in operating advanced predictors and radar-guided fire control systems. These technological innovations allowed the 55 caliber, 90-millimeter gun to serve as a pivotal element in defending the American homeland, especially during the intense air raids launched by the Luftwaffe. As the conflict intensified and moved toward the European continent, the gun was transported overseas along with American divisions seeking to bolster Allied defenses. The weapon, portable in theory, was in practice quite heavy, requiring a robust prime mover for transportation, so it was typically positioned at strategic locations such as supply depots, seaports, and vital road junctions. Its role was primarily to counter enemy air assaults, but it was seldom employed in a direct role against ground targets. Yet the gun's inherent characteristics, specifically its elongated barrel and the high velocity of its shells, hinted at a capability that many found potentially valuable in a basic ground combat role. The possibility was rooted in its impressive armor-piercing shells, which had undergone testing and demonstrated that the gun could penetrate armor exceeding 120 millimeters in thickness at a range of 1,000 meters. An astonishing capability that was comparable against the armor of the feared German Panther tanks. Before the Battle of the Bulge, some American units had already begun exploring this alternative use. In the rugged terrains of Italy during 1943 and 1944, isolated batteries occasionally employed the 90-millimeter gun for indirect fire, targeting bunkers, fortified positions, and entrenched enemy troop concentrations with devastating efficacy. These experimental uses indicated the potential versatility inherent in the weapon beyond its original intended purpose. Following the Normandy landings in France, reports circulated of the gun being employed in a direct fire capacity against German strongpoints, although these instances remained sporadic and lacked formal doctrinal support. Nonetheless, such actions demonstrated the growing realization among American military planners of the gun's ground combat potential. Despite this, the Germans, well aware of the existence of the 90-millimeter weapon, had initially dismissed it as primarily an anti-aircraft threat. Their strategic focus was on countering the ubiquitous American Sherman tanks and the British anti-tank guns, such as the 6-pounder and the larger 17-pounder, which posed a more immediate threat to their armored formations. German high command had expected that when American forces deployed significant anti-tank firepower, it would chiefly come from specialized tank destroyers, vehicle-mounted weapons designed explicitly for this purpose, like the M10 or the M36. In the tumult and chaos of the Ardennes, a shining example of American military resourcefulness emerged, showcasing ingenuity in the effective utilization of their anti-aircraft artillery. These weapons, typically designed to defend the skies from enemy aircraft, were ingeniously repurposed as ground fire support. Often they were concealed behind protective embankments alongside roads or strategically situated at crucial crossroads. These were the vital points where German armored columns sought to press forward and break through defensive lines. As the conflict intensified and the battlefield erupted into disorder, the presence of these mobile anti-aircraft guns turned out to be remarkably fortuitous. Many of these guns had been positioned near logistical hubs, key locations that the German forces were aiming to punch through in their relentless push. Recognizing this, American commanders rapidly adjusted their military tactics. They hurriedly reoriented these weapons to serve new roles. Fire control teams meticulously stripped their equipment so that their guns could be aimed directly at enemy targets, rather than relying solely on anti-aircraft fire roles. In addition, ammunition was rushed forward and allocated for the specific purpose of penetrating armor. Armor-piercing shells were in such high demand that their transport and deployment became a top priority. Despite the logistical difficulties posed by snow-covered terrain and muddy conditions of the winter landscape, once these 90-millimeter weapons were properly emplaced and stabilized, they proved to be formidable. Their dominant presence was felt across expansive fields of fire, where their long reach allowed them to hit targets at significant distances. The crews operating these guns, initially trained primarily to strike fast-moving aircraft, found an unexpected advantage. The slow-moving, massive silhouettes of German tanks became much easier to target. They especially excelled at ranges where most German gunners felt secure and confident in their defenses. The technical superiority of the 90-millimeter gun was evident not just in the raw power of its shells, but also in its versatility and adaptability on the battlefield. This weapon system boasted a high rate of fire, and its shells could be fitted with time fuses, making it deadly against advancing infantry units as well as armored vehicles. In the snow-laden Belgian countryside, a single artillery battery equipped with these guns could effectively hold a village or control a crucial crossroads. They provided a dual function, dishing out anti-tank fire against blitzing German armor and launching bombardments against advancing infantry troops. This flexibility and firepower drastically altered the psychological landscape for American soldiers, many of whom had doubted their ability to stand up to the formidable German tanks such as the Panther and Tiger. The realization that, with adequate support, even these heavily armored German machines could be brought down swiftly and efficiently became a turning point. Word spread quickly among Allied forces, fueling a renewed confidence and morale just when despair was beginning to take root. During the intense German counteroffensive, the sheer weight and devastating impact of German armor were concentrated in their armored spearheads, a display of the Waffenmacht's most powerful and advanced tanks. The German army had assembled some of the most formidable armored vehicles ever seen in Europe by that point in the war. Machines that embodied both the impressive craftsmanship of German engineering and the desperation of a regime striving desperately to turn the tide of conflict. At the core of these armored spearheads were two legendary tanks, the Panther medium tank and the Tiger II, often called the King Tiger because of its awe-inspiring strength and firepower. Both vehicles presented a level of threat that American and British troops had come to fear since their initial encounters in Normandy. The Panther, armed with its 75mm KWK-42 L-70 long gun, was celebrated for its exceptional accuracy and ability to penetrate enemy armor at extended ranges. Its protected hull was sloped in such a way that the armor imparted protection comparable to much thicker plates, making frontal assaults by the standard Sherman tanks extraordinarily dangerous, all but suicidal. The Tiger II, arguably the most intimidating of all German tanks in the campaign, weighed nearly 70 tons and was protected by frontal armor reaching an astounding 150 millimeters in thickness. Its 88mm KWK-43 cannon could obliterate Allied tanks from distances exceeding 2 kilometers, a truly terrifying prospect for any adversary. German tank crews, often seasoned veterans from the Eastern Front, carried a deep-seated confidence rooted in their machines' proven capabilities. They believed the Ardennes campaign might replicate the earlier successes of 1940, when German armored units had swept through France with minimal resistance, rapidly slicing through the enemy lines. Supporting these heavy tanks were divisions comprising the versatile Panzer IV tanks, which remained numerous and reliable throughout the campaign. Alongside them, assault guns such as the Sturmgeschütz III and the Jagdpanzer IV played critical roles as well. Collectively, these diverse vehicles formed armored wedges, cohesive, powerful forces designed to breach thin American defenses, reach strategic road junctions swiftly, and disrupt Allied logistical lines at their core. The terrain, while challenging, blanketed in snow and muddied by winter rains, served as both their sophisticated targeting systems, and repositioning them required careful planning under immense pressure. Crews, fatigued from the relentless snow and chaos, scrambled to move the heavy artillery pieces into concealed hiding spots along the roadside or amidst dense woodland. The goal was to set up a deadly ambush, catching the German armor off guard. As the German spearheads pressed forward through the rugged, densely wooded terrain and over hilly landscapes, they faced unexpected resistance from these newly deployed weapon systems. The American forces had not anticipated that their own anti-aircraft guns, initially intended for defense against aerial threats, would become potent anti-tank weapons in this desperate close-quarters combat. When finally the Panthers and Tigers advanced within range of these guns, the carefully concealed 90mm anti-aircraft artillery unleashed a devastating barrage, crippling or destroying tanks with brutal efficiency. This tactical shift came at a perilous time, as the German advance was beginning to slow. The heavy snow, which initially hindered progress, now played a crucial role by obscuring American gun positions and making it difficult for German tanks to situate themselves for effective fire. Meanwhile, the American artillery's surprise deployment created chaos among the advancing columns. Some German tanks were hit unexpectedly and were forced to retreat or become immobilized, which allowed American infantry and light vehicles to regroup and mount counteroffensives. At the same time, American commanders faced difficult decisions. The initial battlefield protocols had not accounted for such fierce, concentrated armored assaults from formidable panzer divisions. Conventional anti-tank weapons, like the 57 mm and 75 mm guns, had proved largely ineffective against the thick armor of Panther and Tiger tanks. Desperate to find a solution, officers began to withdraw their 90 mm anti-aircraft guns from their initial positions, reassigning them from static defense roles to active engagement with the enemy. This pivot marked a significant escalation in tactics, transforming what was once an anti-aircraft system into a true anti-tank weapon, capable of tackling the most formidable German tanks in direct fire. However, repositioning these enormous guns was a complex, labor-intensive process that required careful coordination. The crews, already exhausted by days of fighting through icy conditions, had to navigate treacherous terrain, often under fire, to find suitable locations where the guns could be emplaced with a clear line of sight while remaining concealed from the enemy's view. The weight of each gun, almost 9 tons, made this task arduous, demanding both skill and determination. Yet the strategic advantage gained through these repositions was invaluable, providing the Americans with a much-needed boost in confronting the German armored onslaught. The deployment of these 90 mm guns fundamentally shifted the battlefield dynamics. For the first time, the Americans had a credible counter to the heavily armored German tanks, which had previously seemed invincible. This turn of events introduced new risks for the Germans, who soon realized that their once confident advance through the Ardennes was slowing down significantly due to this unexpected resistance. The heavy snow, combined with the American artillery's emerging effectiveness, created a tangled, deadly battlefield where momentum was increasingly in the defenders' favor. In this chaos, American officers had to adapt rapidly, employing ingenuity and improvisation to meet the challenge posed by the German armored initiative. The initial failure of their conventional anti-tank weapons had forced them to think outside the box, utilizing existing resources in innovative ways. The now activated 90 mm anti-aircraft guns, concealed within the snow-covered woods and along narrow roads, became instrumental in halting or damaging some of the most dangerous German tanks, sowing confusion and forcing the German columns to slow and reassess their approach. All of this unfolded amidst mounting pressure, with the American troops fighting desperately to hold their positions in the face of a relentless, well-orchestrated armored assault. Their quick thinking and willingness to repurpose their weapons proved critical in the wider context of the battle, illustrating how adversity often sparks ingenuity in the chaos of war. While the German plans had initially relied on swift, overwhelming advances that would leave the Allies struggling to respond, these unforeseen American countermeasures soon began to turn the tide, challenging the Germans' confidence and forcing them to adapt to a highly unpredictable and dangerous battlefield. Relied heavily on resourcefulness and a flexible approach to combat challenges that arose unexpectedly on the battlefield. Requiring the repositioning of their heavy artillery, units often needed to use heavy trucks or tracked prime movers to quickly relocate their guns from one location to another. The terrain and conditions presented significant obstacles: roads choked with snow, abandoned vehicles strewn about, and wreckage cluttering the pathways, all of which made movement slow, perilous, and often treacherous. Nonetheless, the crews operating these guns, many of whom were initially trained exclusively for high-altitude engagements, exhibited extraordinary adaptability and ingenuity under pressure. In some instances, these units disassembled complex fire control systems to lighten the load, aiming to facilitate faster, more responsive aiming. Others took the extra step of digging their guns into the ground, transforming them into stable and effective firing platforms. These makeshift fortifications were strategically placed at critical points, such as road junctions or the outskirts of villages, where they could exert maximum influence on advancing enemy forces. Ammunition carriers worked tirelessly, pushing armor-piercing shells forward through the snow and rubble, often scavenging from depots that hadn't anticipated such urgent demands, ensuring sustained firepower on the front line. The ingenuity extended beyond just hardware modifications and repositioning. Field improvisation also involved tactical concealment. Infantry and engineering units worked closely to hide gun positions behind snowbanks and dense foliage, transforming them into deadly ambush sites. Gun crews initially accustomed to calculating lead angles while targeting high-flying bomber aircraft quickly adapted to the more visceral challenge of aiming at tanks moving through narrow lanes or approaching along village streets. Instead of tracking targets flying across the sky, they now focused through trees on massive, approaching silhouettes, an entirely different, more immediate form of combat. This discipline of precise, calm execution persisted across all units, regardless of the new circumstances. The crews maintained the same level of required accuracy, timing, and composure they had honed through aerial gunnery training. One notable example of this ability to adapt came from units supporting the 2nd Armored Division during the German push toward key Belgian villages. Commanders ordered their 90mm anti-tank batteries to shift focus and cover the flanks where the more vulnerable Sherman tanks couldn't effectively hold their positions. These guns were set up at crossroads and hidden behind natural cover, such as stone walls, waiting silently in ambush until German armor approached within approximately 1,000 meters. At this range, the high velocity of the 90mm shells allowed them to pierce even the thick frontal armor of the formidable Panther tanks. Reports from these encounters detailed how shells hit their targets with devastating precision, smashing through turrets, igniting fuel supplies, and forcing German crews to abandon tanks that, until then, had seemed invulnerable. However, not all deployments of this weaponry went smoothly. Its large size and conspicuous nature made it vulnerable once its position was compromised. When the Germans detected these guns, artillery and mortar fire from the enemy would often zero in on their location, resulting in heavy casualties among the crews before they could withdraw or relocate. Despite these setbacks, the destructive power of the 90mm guns justified the associated risks, giving the Americans a significant tactical advantage in critical moments. Similarly, American tank destroyers like the M36 Jackson, armed with the same powerful caliber, served as mobile solutions, but often found themselves in limited numbers, unable to provide comprehensive coverage across the extensive battlefield. To compensate, towed versions of these guns, despite the logistical challenges involved in moving and deploying them, were employed to fill gaps in the defensive line. What gradually emerged was a patchwork network of resistance, where ingenuity, resourcefulness, and resolve combined to compensate for shortages and equipment limitations. American commanders prioritized not solely relying on doctrine, but instead trusted the initiative of local officers and non-commissioned officers to determine the best placements for their weapons, where they could make the greatest impact. Locations such as the crossroads at Barak-Dur, villages outside Baston, and approaches to Seine-Vie became focal points for such ad hoc defenses. Here, crews operating 90mm guns often worked side by side with infantry, creating makeshift yet effective strongholds that disrupted and delayed the German advance. Each tank destroyed translated into valuable time gain, time that allowed for additional reserves to mobilize and take the fight to the enemy. In a remarkable demonstration of tactical innovation, the Americans transformed their air defense guns, originally designed to shoot down aircraft, into formidable anti-tank weapons. This resourcefulness underscored their ability to adapt rapidly to evolving battlefield conditions, turning the very equipment meant for one purpose into a powerful tool against a different kind of enemy threat. Such flexibility and improvisation played a crucial role in their defensive efforts, exemplifying how ingenuity and determination could shape the outcome against formidable German forces. The evolution of battlefield tactics and technology during this period vividly demonstrated the remarkable ingenuity and resilience that German planners had not fully anticipated. Improvisation, born out of necessity, quickly became the cornerstone of survival, transforming into a form of resistance so formidable that it effectively challenged the very machinery designed to ensure victory. As the clash of steel and fire intensified, the initial expectations of swift German dominance were gradually dismantled by unforeseen challenges posed by American defenses. The first encounters where the formidable 90mm anti-tank guns confronted the imposing German armor produced shock waves that rippled through both armies, forever altering perceptions of the battlefield. During those crucial days on December the 17th and 18th, when the offensive still surged forward with unrelenting momentum, German tank units moving along the narrow, winding roads of the Ardennes suddenly found themselves confronting an entirely different level of threat. These German formations, expecting only the comparatively lighter Shermans or the less potent American anti-tank guns, were taken aback to discover that their pride, namely the feared Panther tanks and the formidable Tiger IIs, could be brought down with alarming ease by well-placed shots from the newer American guns. Accounts from soldiers who survived those encounters paint a vivid picture of the chaos and sudden destruction that unfolded. Near the villages of Krinkel and Rocherath, which found themselves in the path of the powerful 12th SS Panzer Division, American gunners positioned their 90mm cannons behind strategic cover, rubble piles, hedgerows, and embankments, waiting patiently for German armor to attempt passage. When the mechanized assaults began, the American crews fired at ranges between about 700 to 900 meters, targeting the vulnerable sides of the German tanks. Shells struck with precision, penetrating the sloped armor of Panthers and igniting explosions that sent flames licking through the air. In some instances, the shells punched through the frontal glass of tanks at closer distances, rendering the vehicles temporarily immobilized and forcing their crews into frantic escapes amid a backdrop of smoke, fire, and shattered steel. As the German infantry and support units advanced to keep pace with their armored counterparts, they found themselves suddenly exposed to the relentless American firepower. Soldiers supporting the tanks ducked into ditches and debris fields, desperately seeking cover as the sight of burning wrecks clogged the narrow roads. The German officers, who had confidently assured their men of an unstoppable push forward, were confronted with a stark and horrifying reality. The American anti-tank weapons had revealed unexpected lethality. Scenes similar to those near Rocherath also played out near St. Veit, where the spearheads of the 5th Panzer Army collided with American defenses that had been hastily reinforced with the newly effective 90mm guns. One artillery battery on the scene reported knocking out as many as 6 tanks during a single engagement, forcing the remaining German units to retreat, regroup, and reassess their tactics. This newfound vulnerability shook the confidence of German tank crews who had, until then, trained themselves to shrug off lighter weapons and assume that heavier armor would ensure invulnerability. Yet faced with the destructive precision of the American guns, whose high-velocity shells could punch through armor or shatter glass at close range, the Germans learned that lingering in exposed positions was a mortal risk. To mitigate the danger, the Germans began employing smoke screens and artillery barrages, attempting to obscure their movements and deceive the American gunners. Despite these efforts, the accuracy and destructive power of the 90mm weapons proved too formidable for complete protection. For the American defenders on the other side, these encounters provided a significant morale boost, infusing their ranks with newfound confidence. Soldiers who had previously felt helpless or overwhelmed by the sight of massive German tanks, most notably Tigers and Panthers, saw those once seemingly invincible machines destroyed right before their eyes. As tanks ground to a sudden halt, their turrets blown open, or crews hastily evacuating into the cold winter snow, cheers erupted among the infantrymen manning foxholes and roadblocks. The realization quickly disseminated among the troops that with these guns in their arsenal, even the heaviest German armor could be halted and neutralized. The psychological impact on the German units was equally profound. Rumors spread rapidly, fueled by the apparent effectiveness of the American anti-tank weaponry. Some soldiers believed that their enemies had secretly introduced new, super weaponry. Either British 17-pounders or experimental prototypes rushed into the chaos of battle, contributing to the sudden and unexpected resistance they faced. In truth, the guns in question were straightforward adaptations of existing anti-tank weapons, but the aura of surprise that surrounded their deployment magnified their perceived effectiveness, instilling doubt and hesitation among German tank commanders. Initially, German tank commanders, who had been confident of their ability to swiftly break through lightly armed American defenses, began to approach the battlefield with greater caution. The realization that their opponent's firepower could shatter their most formidable tanks at significant ranges forced a reassessment of their tactics. In response, some in the early hours of the Ardennes campaign, the momentum that the German offensive desperately needed to carry them through their initial push was beginning to falter. The battlefield evidence was unmistakable and compelling. The roads were clogged with wrecked German armor, many of these tanks still smoldering amidst the newly fallen snow that blanketed the landscape. American engineers, quick to adapt to the chaos, often repurposed these destroyed vehicles as makeshift barricades. These impromptu defenses further impeded the movement of the advancing German columns, effectively turning wreckage into tactical obstacles. Prisoners captured in the aftermath of these encounters later expressed their surprise, revealing that they had not anticipated encountering such fierce and precise ground fire from America's anti-aircraft units, an unexpected obstacle that caught them off guard. What initially appeared as a haphazard improvisation in the face of adversity soon matured into a widely recognized and effective defensive tactic, one that was rapidly adopted wherever the formidable 90mm guns could be deployed. The first instances where these weapons unleashed their devastating firepower amid the falling snow represented a significant turning point in the battle. While they did not immediately halt the relentless German offensive, these powerful defenses made it clear to both sides that the myth of German invincibility, especially regarding their armored spearheads, was beginning to crack under pressure. The legend of the unstoppable German panzers was gradually being dismantled by American ingenuity and adaptability, and each subsequent engagement bore the imprint of these early battles, where an unexpected weapon had played a decisive role. As the fighting dragged deeper into December, the Ardennes became not only a battlefield of firepower, but a grueling test of endurance for both sides. The German strategy of rapid, deep advances depended heavily on swift progress through the dense, snowy terrain. Yet fierce resistance at critical nodes transformed seemingly minor villages and crossroads into pivotal defensive strongholds. Locations such as Bastogne, Saint-Vith, and numerous smaller settlements scattered across the snowy, wooded landscape became etched into history precisely because American units managed to hold these positions long enough to disrupt the German timetable and morale. In this persistent struggle, the 90mm guns emerged as a crucial element in bolstering fragile defensive lines, especially where armored support was sparse or stretched thin. The 7th Armored Division, tasked with protecting the approaches to Saint-Vith, found itself repeatedly subjected to relentless assaults by elements of the 5th Panzer Army. Narrow terrain bottlenecks funneled German armor into confined roads and passes, making them vulnerable to well-placed artillery fire. Recognizing this strategic vulnerability, American commanders deployed these guns along ridges and behind embankments adjacent to roadways. Period reports highlight how these batteries, often positioned atop elevated ground or concealed behind natural cover, eliminated multiple enemy vehicles before they could mount an effective response. At Saint-Vith itself, tactical delaying actions succeeded in holding the German forces for nearly a week, a remarkable feat considering the series of attacks and the demanding winter conditions. Every extra day of resistance prevented the Germans from seizing a vital road junction, allowing additional reinforcements from both the north and south to arrive and tighten the encirclement, ultimately stalling the German advance and disrupting their plans for rapid encirclement. Similarly, at Bastogne, defended primarily by the 101st Airborne Division, the 90mm guns proved instrumental. Although the division is often remembered for the heroic stand of the paratroopers, the artillery units operating in the vicinity provided vital anti-tank firepower that contributed heavily to the town's defenses. These artillery batteries, dug into frozen fields and concealed beneath drifting snow, were strategically positioned to cover open approaches and choke points around the town. As German tanks attempted to encircle Bastogne, these guns unleashed devastating long-range volleys, pounding the advancing armor from afar. Witness accounts recall how the paratroopers cheered as shells from these large-caliber guns tore into the encroaching vehicles, effectively halting what could have been a catastrophic breakthrough that might have broken through the defenses encircling the town. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the 2nd Armored Division relied heavily on 90mm fire to plug gaps in the line created by retreating infantry units, preventing German forces from exploiting any breach in the American front. In villages such as Sels and Hotten, the artillery's firepower was vital in repelling assaults that aimed to outflank American positions, preserving the integrity of their defensive lines and preventing the Germans from gaining spatial advantage or decisive breakthroughs. Throughout these encounters, the significance of the 90mm guns in shaping the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge became ever more apparent. transforming what might have been a swift German victory into a harrowing, drawn-out contest. Their ability to lay down precise, powerful fire in the heart of winter's harsh terrain proved decisive time and again, turning the battle in favor of the beleaguered Allied defenders by preventing the Germans from achieving their strategic objectives and buying crucial time for reinforcements to arrive. The American forces had positioned a series of defensive setups, not merely relying on their innate firepower, but strategically placing significant artillery assets that, although limited in number, dramatically amplified the defensive strength of their extended lines. One such exemplification was the deployment of a solitary artillery battery, meticulously aimed and coordinated, capable of dominating an entire road or a broad valley. These pinpointed fire missions compelled the German forces to either commit vast, overwhelming forces in an attempt to breach the defenses or to reroute their advances along alternative paths, thus disrupting their carefully planned timetable. The delays inflicted upon the German advance proved to be catastrophic, often forcing them off their meticulously designed schedule. To successfully hold their positions against relentless enemy pressure, the defending units relied not solely on their artillery's firepower, but crucially on seamless coordination among different branches of their forces. Effective communication channels linked the artillery crews, infantry units, and engineering teams, ensuring a synchronized effort. For instance, 90mm guns were employed in concert with mines carefully laid on the battlefield, specialized teams armed with bazookas, and Sherman tanks maneuvered to support the defenses, creating a mutually reinforcing web of protection that complicated the German assault. On many occasions, a layered defense system materialized. Light mobile weapons, such as machine guns and anti-personnel weapons, slowed down the advancing German infantry and smaller armored vehicles, steering the heavier tanks into predictable, pre-armed corridors. These corridors were monitored and fortified with the larger, more powerful artillery pieces, which lay in wait to unleash devastating fire. This tactical assembly of various weapon systems exemplified a burgeoning maturity in American combined arms tactics, revealing how improvisation and resourcefulness under battlefield stress could evolve rapidly into a coherent, effective defensive framework. The weather conditions played an instrumental role in magnifying the effectiveness of the American artillery. Thick fogs, limited visibility, and snow-laden forests created a natural funnel that restricted German maneuvers, rendering their tanks vulnerable to ambush and exposing them to concentrated fire. Moreover, when a critical road became clogged with wreckage from destroyed armored vehicles, the entire column, unable to proceed, became paralyzed. These stalled columns, caught in a narrow corridor and exposed amid falling snow and obscured vision, became prime targets for relentless American gunfire. In those pivotal moments, crews operating the 90mm guns fired tirelessly, fully aware that each tank they destroyed didn't just diminish the enemy's armored strength, but also prolong their delay. Every wrecked tank further hindered the Germans' ability to quickly regroup and launch a renewed, coordinated push. By the end of December, it became clear that while the American front had been stretched and battered, it had not been broken. The defenses had absorbed the assault but remained resilient. The German offensive began to lose its momentum, grinding to a near halt under the relentless resistance coupled with persistent delays. This slowdown was not merely accidental, but owed much to the unwavering resolve of the American units, quartered in freezing, harsh conditions, battling the cold alongside the constant threat of enemy attack. Crucially, the 90mm guns' effectiveness was undeniable. These weapons had turned scattered, isolated strongholds into formidable bastions, ensuring that the Germans could not achieve the swift breakthrough they desperately sought. Their progress was continually hampered by the stalwart American defenses, which turned every contested mile into a grind. Moreover, the fissures in the German offensive plans widened not only because of the stubborn American resistance, but also due to critical miscalculations made both in Berlin and at the front lines. German military intelligence had based its assumptions on outdated, overly optimistic estimates of Allied strength. Their reconnaissance primarily focused on known quantities, such as the number of Sherman tanks produced and the deployment of tank destroyer battalions, while ignoring the flexibility of American tactics. The Americans were known for their tendency to repurpose and adapt weapons outside their traditional roles, a trait underestimated by German intelligence. Specifically, the Germans failed to realize that the 90-millimeter guns, officially classified and often thought of as anti-aircraft weaponry, served as a potent battlefield obstacle against armored vehicles. This underestimation fostered a dangerous overconfidence among enemy tank crews, who dismissed these guns as minor threats. German commanders confidently reassured their soldiers that only British 17-pounder guns posed a serious risk to their armor, a belief that proved perilously false. When German tanks advanced into the Arden Forest, their leaders often did so with less caution than prudent, convinced that only mines and artillery concentrations could impede their progress. Reports and battlefield observations highlight that many German formations charged forward along narrow roads, ignoring the potential threat posed by concealed anti-tank guns. Their confidence proved to be misplaced. The episode culminated tragically for the Germans when, amidst the snow-covered terrain, they began to witness their armored columns engulfed in flames and wreckage, burning hulks that suddenly and fiercely testified to the lethal efficiency of the very weapons they had dismissed. These tanks, victims of the largely underestimated 90-millimeter guns, the weaknesses in German logistics served to amplify the overall failure of their military operation. The offensive, already built on a fragile foundation of calculated risks, hinged heavily on strict timing and the successful seizure of Allied fuel reserves. Every unforeseen delay disrupted this delicate balance, causing fuel consumption to spiral out of control and hampering the entire campaign. Ironically, some of the German artillery, specifically their 90-millimeter guns, wreaked havoc that unwittingly intensified their supply issues. By targeting tanks at critical choke points, these guns often destroyed them, but at the cost of damaging the very infrastructure they depended upon: fuel supplies and transportation routes. The destruction of key tank columns behind wreckage meant that vast quantities of vital gasoline went to burnings and losses, with recovery vehicles often scarce and vulnerable to ambushes, further compounding logistical difficulties. In the aftermath of the battle, historical German diaries uncovered by Allied forces reveal a brewing sense of frustration and anger among their commanders and troops. Tank crews, stranded on frigid roads and surrounded by the debris of their fallen comrades, lamented their inability to either advance or retreat efficiently. The winter's cold compounded their suffering, leaving them immobilized and vulnerable. The mental toll extended beyond the frontline soldiers. Command staff and support personnel also felt a growing sense of helplessness as their plans unraveled. The once promised momentum and supposed superiority of German armor were slipping away. Meanwhile, infantry units tasked with supporting the armored columns grew increasingly hesitant to press forward into enemy territory when their spearheads suffered sudden, inexplicable setbacks. High-ranking officers had assured their men that the campaign would quickly surge forward with overwhelming force, but reality proved far more arduous. By late December, the end of the year, what had begun as swift, decisive strikes had degenerated into slow, grinding attrition that drained morale and exhausted resources. Soldiers who had once believed in the inevitability of victory began doubting their leaders' reassurances, especially when the formidable Tigers and Panthers, symbols of German armored dominance, were discovered abandoned in the frozen fields. Many of these feared tanks had their armor effectively pierced by weapons many of the crew had never encountered before, exposing their vulnerabilities and undermining morale further. Strategically, Hitler's insistence on secrecy and a centralized command structure exacerbated the difficulties faced on the battlefield. This rigid hierarchy often prevented timely tactical adjustments, leaving commanders blind to the evolving threats. At the operational level, communication failures compounded the chaos. Reports from the front lines frequently lacked accuracy or were delayed altogether. Command centers remained in the dark about the true extent of American resistance and the locations of enemy units, leading to repeated mistakes. German units often found themselves directing their armor into ambush zones patrolled by well-placed American 90-millimeter gun batteries, an oversight that proved disastrous. In the harsh winter months of 1944, these misjudgments translated into significant wastage of manpower and precious vehicles, which the German military could ill afford to lose amidst their dwindling supplies. In stark contrast, the United States Army demonstrated remarkable flexibility and adaptability. While German doctrine emphasized concentrated armored breakthroughs and aggressive focused strikes, the Americans quickly learned the importance of dispersion, repositioning their artillery to avoid predictable attack patterns. By the time German tank commanders recognized the danger posed by the growing deployment of the 90mm guns, that pattern of American tactics had already been well established. Defensive setups incorporating these weapons had become entrenched, making a decisive breakthrough impossible. The Germans' misjudgment regarding American artillery versatility became a critical factor, revealing their underestimation of the Allies' capacity for innovation. This oversight joined a long list of miscalculations in the Ardennes offensive, which was plagued by a reliance on suboptimal weather conditions for concealment, an underestimation of the depth and resilience of Allied logistical networks, and the assumption that surprise alone could compensate for shortages of equipment and supplies. These flawed assumptions contributed heavily to the campaign's eventual failure. More than any single piece of equipment, the strategic blunder involving the 90mm guns embodied the broader issues at play. German high command had wrongly assumed that their adversaries would remain predictable and limited in their tactics. Instead, the Americans displayed an extraordinary capacity for battlefield innovation. They turned what was initially perceived as a liability, their guns, into one of the campaign's most powerful and decisive tools, fundamentally shifting the tide of the fighting. When winter fully set in, blanketing the battlefield with snow during January of the year 1945, the Ardennes offensive had finally collapsed. The landscape bore testament to the fierce fighting. It was strewn with wrecked tanks, abandoned vehicles, and a staggering number of casualties that stretched across both sides. The defeat left a trail of destruction in its wake, a stark reminder of how miscalculations and logistical failures can bring a well-planned offensive to its knees. For the United States Army, one of the most enduring lessons gleaned from this bitter campaign was the unpredictable versatility of the 90mm gun. Originally developed with specific tactics, and during its operational use as an anti-aircraft weapon, the formidable 90mm gun demonstrated remarkable effectiveness, especially during the Battle of the Bulge, where it proved that high-velocity, large-caliber artillery could profoundly influence the trajectory of armored combat. Its performance during this intense confrontation revealed a crucial truth. With innovative tactics and determined deployment, heavy-caliber weaponry could decisively alter the outcome of tank engagements, challenging previously held assumptions about their roles and limitations. The results from this period were striking and undeniable. German forces suffered the loss of nearly 600 tanks and assault guns during the Battle of the Bulge, many of which were destroyed in combat scenarios where the 90mm gun's fire played a pivotal role. This weapon, initially designed for anti-aircraft purposes, proved to be more versatile and potent than many had anticipated. Detailed after-action reports, meticulously compiled by officers from the United States Army Ordnance Department, emphasized that under favorable conditions, the 90mm gun was capable of penetrating the frontal armor of the formidable Panther tanks, as well as occasionally breaching the armor of the feared Tiger II, King Tiger, even in frontal assaults considered to be among the most challenging. For the soldiers on the front lines, many of whom had held a firm belief that only Allied air superiority or overwhelming artillery could bring German heavy armor to a halt, these revelations brought about a significant shift in perception. The realization that a relatively small caliber, mobile weapon could effectively counter heavily armored German tanks instilled new confidence and opened up tactical possibilities that previously seemed improbable. It became clear that with skillful positioning and firing techniques, the 90mm gun could serve as a potent countermeasure against the might of the German panzer armies. The impact of these findings extended beyond immediate battlefield success, resonating deeply within the strategic doctrines of the American military. Within mere months, the armed forces began reevaluating their approach to anti-tank warfare, shifting away from reliance solely on larger, less flexible systems and recognizing the value of more versatile, tactical weapon integration. The success of the 90mm gun during the Ardennes offensive validated this strategic pivot. Consequently, the weapon was mounted more permanently on armored vehicles, such as the M36 Jackson tank destroyer and later the M26 Pershing heavy tank. When the Pershing was introduced into combat in early 1945, it was equipped with a 90 millimeter main gun derived directly from the successful design used at the Battle of the Bulge, signifying a clear doctrinal evolution. This transition marked a notable shift in U.S. military doctrine, moving away from an exclusive focus on medium-caliber weapons towards matching or surpassing German firepower by employing larger, more capable guns. Observers and commanders on the German side took heed. Interrogations of prisoners and the analysis of captured documents revealed that German tacticians were unexpectedly caught off guard by the Americans' improvisational and effective use of anti-tank firepower. Many admitted that the sudden appearance of this unexpected threat weakened the confidence of panzer units and disrupted their operational momentum, undermining the long-held German pride in their iconic 8.8 centimeter gun, which had successfully served in dual roles, both as an anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapon since the early 1930s. Ironically, by the closing months of 1944, it was the Americans who had become the masters of adaptability and innovation in this arena, seizing the mantle that the Germans had long held. The effectiveness of the 90 millimeter gun at the Bulge not only demonstrated technical prowess, but also underscored a broader strategic lesson of the war, that industrial ingenuity coupled with soldierly resourcefulness could overcome even the most formidable enemy designs. American gunners operating under the harsh freezing conditions of the Ardennes, often with minimal rest, proved decisively that the right weapon, used skillfully and decisively, could blunt offensives aimed at changing the course of the entire conflict. Their determined efforts played a vital role in delaying German spearheads long enough for reinforcements to arrive, an essential factor that contributed to the eventual encirclement and defeat of Hitler's last offensive in Western Europe. In the years following the war, the reputation of the 90 millimeter gun continued to grow, cementing its place as the standard armament for American heavy tanks through the 1950s. It also heavily influenced NATO military doctrines during the early years of the Cold War, fostering a focus on more adaptable and powerful anti-tank weaponry. The lessons learned during the Ardennes campaign profoundly shaped military training manuals and tactical thinking. These documents emphasized that no weapon should be confined to a single, rigid role if circumstances demanded flexible employment. Veteran soldiers who had served with this gun recalled the Battle of the Ardennes as irrefutable proof that adaptability could decide battles just as decisively as technological superiority or numerical advantage. The experience underscored that successful combat outcomes depended increasingly on ingenuity, tactical innovation, and the ability to think dynamically under pressure. Lessons that would guide future armored warfare doctrines, and the saga of the 90 millimeter gun during the Battle of the Bulge transcends a mere tactical maneuver. It embodies a profound story about the unpredictable complexities of warfare. This piece of weaponry, initially developed and intended for specific combat roles, unexpectedly became a pivotal factor in shaping the outcome of the engagement, illustrating how tools of war can often take on unforeseen significance amid chaos. For the German forces, this event served as a harsh and humbling reminder that underestimating an opponent's ingenuity and adaptability can be a costly miscalculation, an oversight that can turn the tide of battle against even the most formidable armies. Conversely, for the Allied forces, the story of the 90 millimeter gun became a symbol of resilience, innovation, and unwavering determination. It proved that with resourcefulness and relentless spirit, defenders could withstand and even counter the most intense and well-coordinated assaults launched by the powerful might of the German Reich. Ultimately, this narrative reflects not only the tactical importance of a particular weapon, but also highlights the broader themes of ingenuity and perseverance that define the true character of warfare.